Hello and welcome to Have a Biscuit, Potter, the Harry Potter podcast that's really about cats sitting on walls. This podcast will contain spoilers and swearing, so only proceed to listen if you are an adult who has read Harry Potter before. I'm Claudia, I'm your host, and today we are discussing the first chapter of the first book. This is The Boy Who Lived in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Reading the first sentence always makes me so nostalgic. I almost tear up every time I read or listen to the words Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. What a mundane beginning to this journey of adventure that we all know the story is going to develop into. I am so pleased to have started my millionth reread of Harry Potter, and I really hope that you are too. What struck me particularly in this particular reread of that chapter is how much setup and name dropping is already going on. So we all know that, for example, Sirius Black is name dropped in this chapter, but also we hear about Daedalus Diggle, Madame Pomfrey. We get a very concise and very precise characterization of Albus Dumbledore, and of course of my favorite cat in the world, Minerva McGonagall. In fact, she is the first magical person that we really read about in the books, because she is the cat sitting on the wall as Mr. Dursley goes about his perfectly normal day. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar, a cat reading a map. Clever McGonagall, she wanted to make sure that she'd got the right house, but let's ask ourselves, why is she there in the first place? What is Professor McGonagall doing on what's ostensibly a school day, because it's described as a dull grey Tuesday? So what is she doing sitting on a wall looking at a map instead of being at her post in Hogwarts teaching students? Maybe because the Dark Lord has just been defeated, they've called for a day off. But if our experience of how Hogwarts is run has told us anything, is that they don't just have days off. I mean, the world could come to an end and Professor Binns would still be droning on about history of magic. So it seems very unlikely that they just have a free day just because Lord Voldemort has been defeated. But then you never know, because randomly in the Chamber of Secrets they call off the exams just because Dumbledore had a funny moment. I don't know. Either way, McGonagall's there sitting on a wall, and I really wish that this chapter was just about her day rather than Vernon Dursley's, but it's not. So while she is probably being all adorable and, maybe having a little nap on the wall and washing herself, maybe chasing after a bird or two, while all of that is going on, Vernon Dursley goes to his job as the director of a drill company. Now we need to remember that this Vernon and Petunia Dursley are young people. Lily Potter dies aged around 21, I believe, and we know that Petunia is not that much older, so I would guess Petunia Dursley to be in her mid-20s at the oldest, if the age gap between her and Lily is 4 or 5 years. Of course, Petunia could have married a much older man. Maybe he is already 40, we don't know. But either way, he is not an old man, and yet he's already the director of a company, which obviously is selling us this very middle-class, traditional English lifestyle. But it still seems pretty impressive that at that age he has such a high position in his company, and Petunia can afford to be a stay-at-home mum. So the big theme of this chapter is middle class. A lot of the time when I hear especially American podcast hosts talk about this chapter, they don't talk about class, and that is because class is such a ridiculously British concept. I didn't realize this before moving here. The idea of class is entrenched in every media, in every book, in every TV show, in every discussion about citizenship, about social issues that takes place in this country. And even in the very first sentences where Petunia is described as craning her neck to spy on the neighbours, we get this idea of this small suburban town of a row of red brick terraced houses like you find them in every town in the UK. Vernon and Petunia live at number 4. That means they don't have the highly coveted end of terrace house, because that would be number 1 or number 2, but the house next to that. So it just shows how much they are entrenched in this idea of class, in this struggle, in this constant competition with your neighbors, with your family. And the fact that they consider the Potters to be such an abomination, that they are so embarrassed about them that Petunia won't even admit she's a sister, that is all to do with class. Of course, it's also to do with her personal history and with her personal ideas of magic and her experiences growing up as the Muggle sister of a special child, of a magical child. But as far as we know, just from this chapter, this is about a middle-class couple who wants to very much fit into their society, who want to make it to the top of that middle class, but who do not want to stand out in the process. So after we get this setup of this perfectly normal, small English suburban family, we start seeing interruptions to that idyllic utopian life that Vernon leads with his wife and his son. There's owls, there's shooting stars, there's people bumping into him, there's people calling him a muggle, and he is just very, very confused. Of course, as soon as the Dursleys are in bed, as soon as we switch from the middle-class suburban daytime into the magical, mystical nighttime, we get to know exactly why. The cat becomes a lady, the cat becomes the lady, the cat becomes the boss, Professor McGonagall. I love her so much. I'm gonna have to try really hard not just to talk about McGonagall for an hour on this podcast. So anyway, the beautiful, intelligent, confident, amazing Professor McGonagall admits to a suddenly apparated, I believe that is the correct term. She admits to a suddenly apparated Albus Dumbledore that she's been sitting on the wall watching the Muggles all day. What she doesn't know is that this is the family that Dumbledore has chosen to just drop Harry Potter off to. He is literally going to drop the baby on the doorstep with a letter and leave him there all night. McGonagall very rightly and righteously asks, "What the actual fuck, Albus?" I paraphrase, but that is the gist of her question. How can he, in good conscience, leave Harry Potter, the precious boy who lived, with these people? And this is a legitimate question. This is a very, very good question to ask. And Dumbledore's all like, well, I don't want him to be spoiled, so... Yes, Dumbledore, maybe you should have vetted that family first. Okay, knowing what we know, it has to be blood magic, blah, blah, blah. But first of all, you could have explained that to Minerva. She's not stupid. And second of all, that doesn't make it okay. At this point, we don't know. Dumbledore couldn't know that Vernon and Petunia Dursley would grow up to be the most horribly abusive adoptive parents to Harry. He couldn't know that at this point. What he does know is that Petunia hates Lily. He knows about the bad blood between them because he's been a correspondent of hers. He knows that Petunia wants nothing to do with the magical world because she's been so brutally rejected from it. So how can he just drop a random baby off at hers. And also, it doesn't seem fair that Petunia suddenly has an unwanted second child. It's not fair on her, it's not fair on Harry, and it's not fair on Vernon Dursley either. By the way, if you hear cat noises in the background, that is my lovely Minerva, who is not as smart, beautiful, clever, intelligent as the real deal, but she's still pretty cute and noisy. So apologies for that. So Dumbledore goes, lol, I'm going to keep this baby here. McGonagall says, how about child services? Dumbledore's like, what? No, we don't care about children's welfare at Hogwarts. And then he says that Hagrid's going to show up with the baby. And McGonagall says something that we are supposed to, I guess, take offense to. And that is, you think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? And Dumbledore says, I would trust Hagrid with my life. Which, first of all, stop trusting people, Dumbledore. And second of all, while Hagrid is trustworthy, he is not the most responsible person. We know that. He messes up so much over the next few books, and Dumbledore has known this man for decades. I wouldn't trust Hagrid with a young baby, and maybe that makes me a horrible person. I am borderline Slytherin after all, but I think it's just more sensible to maybe send someone just a little bit more reliable. Just a tiny bit more reliable. Right? Then, of course, Hagrid shows up, and he is lovely, isn't he? I almost choked up at the point where Hagrid says, could I say goodbye to him, sir? And then he goes and gives Harry a little kiss on the head. Oh, it's so sweet. And this is the first hint that we get of Hagrid as a really quite feminine character. And of course, Rowling does this on purpose. She's contrasting this big, wide, beardy, raggedy, dirty, very masculine body of Hagrid with the very feminine, mothering, loving, emotionally open character of Hagrid. And I love that contrast. I'm going to talk about this loads more, I'm sure, when we get to know Hagrid a bit better. But this feminization of Hagrid makes him one of the most unique characters in the books. This first chapter of the first book is so tightly written. Every word is in its place. It is like the beautiful beginning of a fairy tale. It's been compared to Roald Dahl a lot, and we get why. It's got that very subtle, quirky humor about it. It's got this slight sense of unrealism, of something that wouldn't actually happen. And yet, it's not the most exciting chapter, is it? I know more than one person who's been put off reading Harry Potter from this first chapter, because it doesn't start with a hook, it doesn't start with action, it doesn't even start with the main character. You read this and you think, why should I care about Vernon fucking Dursley? And that is fair enough. Of course, we, reading this as old seasoned fans, we get the nostalgia factor from this chapter. We get the fairy tale-like beginning. We get the hints and name drops of things to come. We get some powerful artifacts and items that become important later on. We get the motorbike, the put-outer, Harry's scar. We get an idea of what Dudley might grow up to be. But none of this is really the most gripping opening to a chapter, I think. And that is interesting. I don't know if she could have done a better job, because I think as an opening to not just the book, but the entire series, this works beautifully. But if I wasn't such a nerdy book-obsessed child, would I have wanted to continue with this series when I first read it, aged 9? I mean, the truth is, probably yes, because lots of people love these books. So clearly, whatever J.K. Rowling did, it worked. Still, slightly untraditional first chapter, I would say, for a children's book. Something else that struck me this time reading it was the emotion in this scene. Professor McGonagall is distraught at the idea of James and Lily Potter dying. Hagrid is heartbroken. Dumbledore tries to brighten up the situation by talking about sherbet lemons and the scar in the shape of the London Underground. But you can tell under the surface that he is shaken too. But this shakenness, this sense of tragedy, is done in a very subtle way. And I like that about it. Okay, I have nothing more to say about this chapter. Please tweet me your thoughts. I am on Twitter at twitter.com/haveabiscuitpod. So that's Have a Biscuit, P-O-D, like podcast. That's where you can find me online. I would love to know what you think of this chapter, what you noticed in rereading it, and if you agree with my assessment of Dumbledore, of McGonagall, and of the Dursleys. This is a very, very new podcast, so I would really appreciate if you subscribe to it, and if you, and I know you hear this all the time, if you rate and review. Rating and reviewing is super important when it comes to making the podcast more available to other people, I guess, because otherwise, unless you search this out, you're not going to be able to find this podcast, except if people leave ratings and reviews. So I would very much appreciate those. You can find me on my YouTube channel, Spinster's Library, at youtube.com/Spinster's Library if you want to hear more about other books that I read that are not Harry Potter. And you can also find me on my as of yet blank Instagram page, instagram.com/haveabiscuitpotterpodcast. This, as I said in the previous episode, might become a McGonagall-inspired fashion page, but we'll see. And lastly, have you got any questions that you would like Professor McGonagall to answer? Now, I am not her, but I hope I know her well enough to have a go at solving your life problems from the perspective of the most intelligent woman in the Harry Potter series. If you do have any life problems, any questions, could be about anything at all, then tweet them using the hashtag AskMcGonagall. And I'll see what we can do. That was everything from today. And remember, if you try and live your life like Professor McGonagall, you really can't go wrong. Goodbye. Have a Biscuit, Potter was written, produced and hosted by Claudia Falcone. The theme song is based on a tarantella by Johann Caspar Merz, and it was performed by Claudia Falcone and produced by Bill Hayes.